I was staring at Emily's coffee-stained apron hanging on the kitchen chair when the doorbell rang at 11:47 p.m. Not a knock, a doorbell. And somehow, I already knew my life was about to shatter into pieces I'd never put back together. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. Two officers stood on my porch, their faces carrying that look. You know the one. The look that says they're about to destroy someone's world, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. Mr. Carter, the older one said, "May we come inside?" Rachel was already behind me, her hand gripping my shoulder. "What's wrong?" Her voice was small, terrified. "It's about your daughter, Emily Carter." The next words came slow, like they were moving through water. "Hit and run. Crosswalk near the coffee shop. High-speed impact. Died at the scene." Rachel's scream tore through our house. She collapsed, and I caught her, but I wasn't really there anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere dark and hollow where sound didn't reach right. The officer kept talking. Vehicle description, ongoing investigation, need to identify the body, but I couldn't hear him over the ringing in my ears. Emily was 23. She'd just gotten promoted to shift manager. She was saving money for graduate school. That morning, she'd kissed my cheek and said, "Love you, Dad. See you tonight." Except I wouldn't. Not tonight. Not ever again. The funeral was 4 days later. I don't remember much of it. Flowers. People saying sorry. Rachel sobbing so hard she couldn't stand. Emily's friends from college, from work, all of them crying. I stood there in my black suit, numb, holding Rachel up while she buried her face in my chest. What I do remember is the detective pulling me aside afterward. "Mr. Carter, I need to be honest with you." Detective Morris looked uncomfortable. "We found the vehicle. Registered to a Marcus Calloway." "Okay." My voice sounded flat. "Empty. So you arrested him?" "Not exactly. The car was registered to his company. His son Ethan was driving it that night." "Then arrest the son." Morris shifted his weight. "It's complicated. The Callaways are a prominent family. Marcus owns Callaway Industries, tech, real estate, half the commercial developments in the state. Their legal team is already involved." I stared at him. "My daughter is dead because someone hit her and drove away. What's complicated about that?" "Nothing. You're right. But I wanted you to know what we're dealing with. These people have resources. They're already claiming mechanical failure, brake malfunction. They've got expert witnesses lined up." The numbness cracked, and underneath it was rage. Pure, burning rage. My daughter was crossing at a green light. She had the right of way. Someone killed her and left her there like trash on the side of the road. My hands were shaking. "I don't care who his father is. I want justice." Morris nodded. "I'm going to do everything I can. But prepare yourself. This won't be easy." He was right. It wasn't easy. The next 2 weeks were hell. Rachel barely left our bedroom. I'd hear her crying at night, sobbing Emily's name. During the day, she'd sit in Emily's room, holding her clothes, staring at nothing. I tried to be strong for her, but I was drowning too. And then the news started coming in. Witnesses who'd been at the scene suddenly refused to talk. The coffee shop's security footage mysteriously malfunctioned that night. Ethan Calloway's lawyers were spinning narratives about brake lines and mechanical inspections. They were building a defense before charges were even filed. I called Morris every day. "What about the paint transfer on Emily's clothes? What about the impact analysis? What about the fact that he fled the scene?" "We're working on it, Mr. Carter. I promise." But I could hear it in his voice. He was hitting walls. Walls built with money and power and lawyers who cost more per hour than I made in a week. 3 weeks after Emily died, Rachel's brother showed up. Jake. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. He was overseas, doing something military he never talked about in detail. Rachel had tried calling him after the accident, but she couldn't reach him. I figured he didn't know. I was wrong. He knocked on the door early on a Tuesday morning. When I opened it, he was standing there in jeans and a black jacket, a duffel bag over his shoulder. His face was hard, controlled, but his eyes, there was something cold and focused in them that made me uncomfortable. "Jake." I stepped aside. Come in. Rachel will be. I know what happened. His voice was quiet. Calm. Too calm. I came as soon as I heard. Rachel appeared from the hallway and broke down the moment she saw him. He held her while she cried, and over her shoulder, his eyes met mine. There was something in that look. Something that said this wasn't just a visit. After Rachel finally fell asleep that afternoon, the first real sleep she'd had in weeks, Jake and I sat at the kitchen table. He was drinking coffee, staring at Emily's picture on the fridge. Tell me everything, he said. The accident, the investigation, the family, everything. So I did. I told him about Ethan Callaway, about Marcus and his empire, about the lawyers and the disappearing evidence, and the walls we kept hitting. Jake listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. Do you want justice, or do you want revenge? I looked at him. What's the difference? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Time. Jake stayed with us for 3 days before he said anything else about what he meant. He was quiet, always watching, always listening. He'd sit with Rachel when she cried, make her tea, help her eat. But when I talked about the case, about the investigation stalling, he'd just nod and take mental notes. On the 4th day, Detective Morris called me. Mr. Carter, we need to talk. Can you come down to the station? I drove there with a knot in my stomach. Morris met me in a small conference room, and his face told me everything before he opened his mouth. They're not filing charges, he said. The room tilted. What? The DA's office reviewed the case. They said there's insufficient evidence to prove Ethan Callaway was driving recklessly or that he deliberately fled the scene. His legal team provided expert testimony about a brake line defect. They're claiming mechanical failure. I stood up so fast my chair hit the wall. That's impossible. Someone hit my daughter hard enough to kill her and kept driving. That's not mechanical failure. That's murder. Morris rubbed his face. He looked exhausted. I know. I agree with you. But the Callaways brought in 3 expert witnesses, all of them claiming the brake system showed signs of where that could have caused sudden failure. They've got statements saying Ethan didn't know he hit anyone, and without witnesses willing to testify. What about the people at the scene? 2 moved out of state. One suddenly can't remember details. Another got a new job in California and won't return calls. Morris leaned forward. Mr. Carter, between you and me, I think they were paid off or threatened. But I can't prove it. I felt like I was falling. So he just walks away? He killed my daughter and nothing happens. There'll be a civil case. You can sue for wrongful death. I don't want money. I want him in prison. Morris looked at me with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry. I really am. But Marcus Callaway has connections all the way to the governor's office. His lawyers are the best money can buy. Unless we get new evidence or a witness willing to brave their legal team, this is over. I drove home in a daze. When I walked through the door, Rachel knew immediately. What did Morris say? She was standing in the kitchen, holding herself together by a thread. They're not charging him. She made a sound I'll never forget, half scream, half sob. No, that's not possible. He killed her. He killed our baby. Jake appeared from the guest room. He took one look at Rachel falling apart and guided her to the couch. Then he turned to me. Tell me exactly what Morris said. I repeated everything. The experts, the witnesses disappearing, the DA dropping the case. Jake's expression never changed, but something shifted in his eyes. And the son? Ethan Callaway. Morris said he's back to his normal life, living in his penthouse downtown like nothing happened. Jake nodded slowly. Okay. I stared at him. That's all you have to say? For now. He stood. I need to make some calls. I'll be back later. He left, and I sat with Rachel while she cried herself sick. I'd never felt so powerless in my life. My daughter was dead, and the person who killed her was walking free because his father had money and lawyers and connections. 2 days later, the preliminary hearing happened anyway, just a formality for the civil case. Rachel couldn't face it, so I went alone. And that's when I saw him. Ethan Callaway. He walked into the courthouse wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. 23 years old, tall, blonde, the kind of kid who'd never faced consequences for anything in his life. His lawyers flanked him like bodyguards, and behind them came Marcus Calloway himself, silver-haired, powerful, looking at everyone like they were beneath him. I sat in the gallery, hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump over the railing and make him feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused. But I just sat there, shaking with rage. The hearing lasted 20 minutes. Ethan's lawyer argued there was no basis for criminal charges. The judge, a man named Harrison who I later learned had ruled in favor of Calloway Industries in 3 previous cases, agreed. Case dismissed. And as Ethan walked out, I saw it. He smirked. Just for a second. When he thought no one was looking, he smirked like this was all a joke. Like my daughter's life was an inconvenience he'd successfully dodged. That's when I noticed Jake. He was sitting in the back row, completely still, watching everything. Watching Ethan, Marcus, the lawyers, the judge. He caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. After the hearing, I found him in the parking lot. Did you see that? I was almost shouting. Did you see him smile? He doesn't care. He killed Emily, and he doesn't even care. I saw. Jake's voice was ice cold. I saw everything. So what do we do? The system failed. The police can't touch him. What the hell do we do now? Jake looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I didn't understand at the time. The system failed because it's designed to protect people like the Calloways. But there are other systems. Systems they don't control. He pulled out his phone. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? What are you going to do? What I was trained to do. He started walking to his car. Find the truth and make sure it comes out. No matter who tries to hide it. I stood there watching him drive away, not knowing that my brother-in-law wasn't just some soldier. He was something much more dangerous than the Calloways could ever imagine. Jake disappeared for 3 days after the hearing. No calls, no texts, nothing. Rachel was worried sick, but I had this strange feeling he was doing exactly what he needed to do. When he came back, he looked different. Tired, but focused. Like he'd been working on something nonstop. Where have you been? Rachel asked, relief washing over her face. Researching. He set his laptop down on the kitchen table. I need to show you both something. He opened a file folder, and inside were documents. Lots of them. Police reports, witness statements, financial records, property deeds. What is all this? I leaned closer. Evidence the police should have found, but didn't. Jake pulled out a printed photo. This is Marcus Calloway's estate. $43 million. This is his company portfolio, 18 properties across 3 states. This is his legal team, 5 lawyers who specialize in making criminal charges disappear. He spread more papers across the table. And these are the witnesses from Emily's accident. Angela Torres worked at the coffee shop across the street. Saw everything. 2 days after giving her statement, she quit her job and moved to Arizona. Got a job paying twice her previous salary at a company that just happens to be a subsidiary of Calloway Industries. My stomach dropped. They paid her off. Not directly. That would be too obvious. But yes, essentially. Jake pulled up another document. David Chun. He was walking his dog, saw the whole thing. 3 days after the accident, someone broke into his apartment. Nothing stolen, but his place was trashed. Message received. He suddenly couldn't remember any details. Rachel's hand was over her mouth. They threatened him. Classic intimidation tactic. Break in, don't take anything, leave everything destroyed. It says, we know where you live, without saying it out loud. Jake's jaw was tight. And then there's Jennifer Martinez. She was in her car at the red light, watched Ethan's car blow through the intersection and hit Emily. She tried calling police that night, but her call somehow got disconnected. Next day, she got contacted by a lawyer offering her money to forget what she saw. She refused. Week later, she lost her job. Coincidence? No. I felt sick. How did you find all this? Jake looked at me. I have resources. People who owe me favors. Databases most civilians don't know exist. He paused. I spent 15 years in the military doing things I can't talk about. building networks, learning how to find information people want hidden. Jake, what exactly did you do in the military? Rachel's voice was quiet. He was silent for a moment. I was special operations. That's all I can say right now. The room went quiet. I'd always known Jake was military, but special operations? That meant something more. Something dangerous. So what do we do with this? I gestured at the papers. We can't go to the police. Not yet. Morris is a good cop, but he's fighting a system that's working against him. The moment we give him this, it'll get buried by lawyers and judges on Calloway's payroll. Jake started packing up the documents. We need more. We need something undeniable. Something they can't cover up. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake became a ghost. He'd leave early in the morning, come back late at night. Sometimes he'd be on his laptop for hours, typing, making calls in hushed tones. Rachel and I tried to focus on getting through each day, but the grief was suffocating. One night, I found Jake in the garage at 2 in the morning, staring at a map of the city with pins marking different locations. Can't sleep? I asked. Rarely do. He didn't look up. Each of these pins is a camera. Traffic cams, security cameras, ATMs with exterior surveillance. I'm tracking Ethan's route that night. The police already did that. The police looked at the obvious cameras. I'm looking at all of them. He pointed to a red pin. This is where he hid Emily. These yellow pins are every camera between there and the Calloway estate. That's where he went afterward. How do you know? Because I've been watching him, following him, learning his patterns, his routines, who he talks to, where he goes. Jake finally looked at me. 3 nights ago, I followed him to a bar downtown. You know what he did? He bragged about getting away with it. Told his friends the whole story like it was funny. Said his dad's lawyers made it all disappear. Rage burned through my chest. And you just watched? Yes. Because if I'd done what I wanted to do, I'd be in jail and he'd still be free. This isn't about revenge through violence. It's about revenge through justice. Real justice. The kind that puts him in prison for the rest of his life. He turned back to the map. I'm building a case so airtight that no lawyer, no judge, no amount of money can make it go away. But it takes time. And it takes patience. I don't have patience. Every day he walks free is another day Emily's death means nothing. Jake's eyes met mine, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before. Something cold and calculated and absolutely lethal. Emily's death means everything. And before this is over, everyone will know it. Ethan Calloway will pay. His father will pay. Everyone who helped cover this up will pay. His voice was quiet but filled with absolute certainty. I give you my word. As a soldier, as her uncle, as family, I believed him. I don't know why, but standing there in that garage at 2 in the morning, looking at this man who'd transformed into something I barely recognized, I believed every word. What do you need from me? Keep Rachel strong. Keep yourself safe. And when the time comes, be ready to face them in court and tell Emily's story. He looked back at the map. Because they're going to know her name. They're going to know what they took from this world. And they're going to spend the rest of their lives regretting it. 3 weeks after Jake started his investigation, Rachel's lawyer called about the civil lawsuit. His name was Thomas Brennan, and he'd taken our case pro bono after hearing about what happened. I need to be honest with you both, he said during our meeting at his office. This is going to be an uphill battle. The Calloways have already filed motions to dismiss. They're claiming sovereign immunity through their charitable foundation status, arguing that any settlement would impact their philanthropic work. That's insane, I said. Ethan wasn't doing charity work when he killed Emily. I agree, but their legal team is creative. They'll use every trick in the book. Thomas leaned back in his chair. However, I've been contacted by someone who says he has evidence that could change everything. A man named Jake Morrison? Rachel and I exchanged glances. That's my brother. He wants to meet with me. Says he has documentation of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Thomas looked curious. Who exactly is your brother? Military, Rachel said quietly. That's all we really know. The meeting happened 2 days later. Jake arrived with a briefcase full of documents. Witness statements, financial records, surveillance photos, phone records. He laid it all out on Thomas's conference table like a prosecutor building a case. This is Angela Torres. Jake pointed to a photo of a young woman. She witnessed the accident. 2 days after giving her police statement, she received a job offer in Arizona from Callaway Tech Solutions, a subsidiary of Callaway Industries. Her salary tripled overnight. She moved within a week and refused to answer any follow-up questions. Thomas was taking notes frantically. That's witness tampering. It gets worse. Jake pulled out more documents. David Chin witnessed the accident from across the street. 3 days later, someone broke into his apartment. Nothing stolen, but everything was destroyed, furniture overturned, belongings smashed. Classic intimidation tactic. The message was clear. Stay quiet, or next time it'll be worse. Did he report it? Thomas asked. He did. Police filed a report, but no investigation was ever opened. When I checked, the officer who took the report was the brother-in-law of Marcus Callaway's head of security. My stomach turned. How deep does this go? Deeper than you want to know. Jake continued. Jennifer Martinez was at the traffic light when Ethan ran through the intersection. She called 911 immediately. Her call was disconnected, supposedly a technical glitch. The next day, a lawyer showed up at her workplace offering her $50,000 to forget what she saw. She refused. A week later, she was fired from her job of 8 years for fabricated performance issues. Thomas looked sick. This is systematic obstruction of justice. And it's all connected back to Callaway Industries through shell companies, third-party contractors, and people on their payroll. Jake pulled out a chart showing the connections. Marcus Callaway has been covering up his son's mistakes for years. This isn't the first time Ethan's gotten away with something. That caught my attention. What do you mean? Jake hesitated, then pulled out another file. 2 years ago, Ethan was involved in an accident that left a woman paralyzed. Her name is Lisa Chun. She settled out of court for an undisclosed amount and signed an NDA. Before that, there was a DUI that disappeared from public records. And before that, an assault charge that was dropped when the victim suddenly refused to testify. Rachel's hand was over her mouth. He's done this before? Multiple times. His father has been buying his way out of consequences since Ethan was 17. Jake's voice was cold. Emily wasn't his first victim. She was just the one that finally killed someone. The room went silent. All I could think about was Emily lying on that street, alone, while Ethan Callaway drove away knowing his father would fix everything. Again, can we use this? I asked Thomas. In the civil case? Absolutely. But this needs to go to the criminal prosecutors. If we can prove witness tampering and obstruction, the criminal case could be reopened. Thomas looked at Jake. How did you get all of this? I'd rather not say, but everything here is verifiable and legally obtained. No wiretaps, no illegal surveillance. Just good old-fashioned investigation work, and people who were willing to talk once they knew someone was actually listening. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll contact the district attorney's office. But I have to warn you, Marcus Callaway has connections there too. The DA, Jennifer Walsh, received campaign contributions from Callaway Industries during her last election. Then we go over her head. Jake said, federal prosecutors, the FBI. We find someone who isn't on Callaway's payroll and we make them listen. Over the next week, Thomas tried. He really did. He submitted the evidence to the DA's office. He requested meetings with federal prosecutors. He filed motions to reopen the criminal investigation. And every door slammed shut. The DA's office claimed there wasn't enough evidence to overcome the initial findings. Federal prosecutors said it was a state matter. The judge assigned to our civil case, the same Judge Harrison who dismissed the criminal case, denied our motions, and set a trial date 8 months away. Rachel was devastated. It's never going to end, is it? They're just going to keep blocking us until we give up. But Jake didn't look defeated. He looked focused, determined. They think they've won, he said quietly that night. They think their money and their lawyers and their connections make them untouchable. He looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes. They're wrong. Because they don't know who they're dealing with. They don't know what I'm capable of. And by the time they figure it out, it'll be too late. What are you planning? I asked. He smiled, and it was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. War. Jake vanished again, but this time it was different. He'd leave notes on the kitchen counter, short, cryptic messages. Checking surveillance. Following a lead. Don't worry. But we did worry. Rachel especially. She'd grown up with Jake, knew him as her protective younger brother who joined the military straight out of high school. But this version of Jake was someone else entirely. Someone colder. More dangerous. 2 weeks into his disappearance, something strange started happening. It began with the news. A local reporter named Natalie Brooks ran a story about unsolved hit-and-runs in our city. She focused on 3 cases over the past 5 years where wealthy defendants had walked away with minimal consequences. Emily's case was prominently featured, along with interviews from families who'd been silenced by legal threats and payoffs. The story went viral. Social media exploded with outrage. People started digging into the Callaways, sharing articles about their business practices, their political donations, their connections to judges and prosecutors. Marcus Callaway's PR team went into damage control immediately. They released statements calling the coverage biased and unfair. They threatened lawsuits. But the story wouldn't die. Then the witnesses started coming forward. Angela Torres, the coffee shop worker who'd moved to Arizona, suddenly appeared on television. She looked terrified but determined. I was offered money to leave town and stay quiet about what I saw, she said during a live interview. I took it because I was scared, but I can't stay quiet anymore. I watched Ethan Callaway's car hit Emily Carter. I saw him look back through his mirror, and I saw him speed away. The interview was devastating. Within hours, David Chun came forward too. He posted a video on social media showing the damage to his apartment from the break-in, explaining how he'd been intimidated into silence. I'm done being afraid, he said. Emily Carter deserves justice, and I'm going to tell the truth about what I witnessed. Then Jennifer Martinez filed a police report detailing the bribery attempt and her subsequent job loss. She named names, the lawyer who approached her, the HR manager who fired her, the connection to Callaway Industries. I watched all of this unfold from my living room, stunned. How is this happening? I asked Rachel. She was crying. But this time they were different tears. Hope mixed with grief. I think Jake had something to do with it. She was right. Jake showed up that night, looking exhausted but satisfied. You did this, I said when he walked through the door. You got them to talk. I gave them protection. He sat down heavily on the couch. Angela was terrified of retaliation, so I connected her with federal witness protection programs. She's not in Arizona anymore. She's somewhere the Callaways can't reach her. David Chun is being protected by people I served with who now work in private security. Jennifer Martinez has a team of lawyers I connected her with, pro bono, ready to sue Callaway Industries for wrongful termination. How did you manage all of this? Jake looked at me with those intense eyes. 15 years in Delta Force creates a network. People who owe you their lives. People who understand what it means to fight for something that matters. He paused. I called in every favor I had. I reached out to contacts in federal agencies, private security, legal aid organizations. I found people who were already investigating the Callaways for other things and connected the dots for them. What do you mean, other things? He pulled out his laptop and opened a folder. While I was tracking Ethan, I started looking into Marcus's business empire. Callaway Industries isn't just real estate and tech. They've got contracts with defense contractors, government agencies, infrastructure projects. And some of those contracts have irregularities. He showed me spreadsheets, financial documents, emails, overbilling on government contracts, falsified environmental impact reports, bribes to zoning officials, money laundering through shell companies. The Callaways have been running a corruption machine for years, and it's all documented. They just thought they were too powerful for anyone to connect the pieces. My mind was spinning. You found all of this? I had help. There's an FBI agent named Cooper Grant. We served together overseas. He's been investigating white-collar corruption for the past 3 years. When I showed him what I found, he realized the Callaways were bigger than anyone knew. He opened a formal investigation. Rachel grabbed Jake's hand. Is this real? Can they actually be stopped? They're already being stopped. Marcus doesn't know it yet, but federal agents are building a case against him right now. Wire fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, tax evasion, bribery. They're looking at everything. Jake's expression was hard. And Ethan? The criminal case is being reopened. The DA doesn't have a choice now that witnesses are coming forward publicly. She either prosecutes or loses her job. That night, Rachel slept peacefully for the first time in months. But I couldn't sleep. I found Jake on the back porch at 3 in the morning, staring at the stars. What you're doing, I said quietly. It's not just investigation. It's warfare. He didn't deny it. I spent 15 years fighting enemies overseas, learning how to dismantle organizations, expose corruption, protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The Callaways are just another enemy. Richer, better connected, but still vulnerable. Everyone has weaknesses. You just have to know where to look. Are you doing this for Emily, or because you're good at it? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Both. Emily was innocent. She had her whole life ahead of her. And someone took that away because they thought money and power made them untouchable. He looked at me. I've seen that story play out in war zones, in corrupt governments, in places where the powerful prey on the weak. I swore an oath to defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. The Callaways are domestic enemies. They're destroying lives and corrupting the system that's supposed to protect people like Emily. What happens next? He smiled that cold, dangerous smile. Next, we watch their empire crumble, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, until there's nothing left but justice. The morning after Jake's revelation, everything changed. I woke up to my phone buzzing with news alerts. Rachel was already in the kitchen, laptop open, staring at the screen with wide eyes. You need to see this, she said. The headline read, FBI launches investigation into Callaway Industries. Allegations of federal contract fraud and corruption. The article detailed how federal agents had raided 3 Callaway Industries offices overnight, seizing documents and computer systems. Anonymous sources claimed the investigation involved wire fraud, money laundering, and falsified government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Marcus Callaway's face was everywhere, leaving his office surrounded by lawyers, refusing to comment. His usual confidence looked shaken. For the first time, he looked like a man who knew the walls were closing in. Jake appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand, looking completely unsurprised. You knew this was happening, I said. I knew it was coming. He sat down at the table. Agent Cooper Grant spent the last 3 weeks coordinating with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Once I gave him the documents I'd collected, they fast-tracked everything. The raid happened at 6 this morning. What did they find? Rachel asked. Everything. Financial records showing systematic overbilling on defense contracts. Evidence of bribes paid to city officials for zoning approvals. Shell companies used to hide money offshore. Wire transfers that violate federal banking laws. Jake took a sip of his coffee. Marcus Callaway built an empire on corruption. It was just a matter of connecting the dots. Over the next week, the news cycle became consumed with the Callaway scandal. Every day brought new revelations. Former employees came forward with stories of illegal business practices, environmental violations, safety code violations at construction sites. Investors started pulling out. Stock prices plummeted. The empire was crumbling in real time. And then came the news about Ethan. The district attorney's office announced they were reopening the criminal investigation into Emily's death. With 3 witnesses now willing to testify publicly and evidence of systematic witness tampering, they had no choice. DA Jennifer Walsh held a press conference, looking uncomfortable as she explained the decision. New evidence has come to light that warrants a thorough re-examination of this case. We take allegations of witness intimidation extremely seriously, and if proven, those responsible will face additional charges. I watched the press conference with Rachel and Jake. When it ended, Rachel burst into tears, the kind of crying that comes from relief and grief mixing together. "It's really happening," she whispered. "Emily's going to get justice." But Jake wasn't celebrating. He was on his phone, texting someone rapidly. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Cornered animals are dangerous. Marcus Calloway is losing everything. His company, his reputation, his freedom. He'll do anything to stop this." Jake looked up. "I'm putting security on your house. Former military guys I trust. They'll be subtle, but they'll be watching." "You think he'd come after us?" "I think he's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I want you protected in case he tries something stupid." That night, I noticed a dark SUV parked down the street. Jake said it was one of his people, a guy named Tyler who'd served with him in Afghanistan. The next morning, another vehicle appeared, alternating shifts with the first. I felt safer, but also more aware of how serious this had become. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Ethan was formally charged with vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident and obstruction of justice. His bail was set at $5 million, which his father paid immediately. But this time, Ethan had an ankle monitor and travel restrictions. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Thomas Brennan, our lawyer, was ecstatic. "This is unprecedented," he told us during a meeting. Having witnesses recant intimidation claims and federal investigators backing up obstruction of justice charges, it gives us everything we need. The criminal case is solid now, and our civil case just became 10 times stronger. But it was what Jake told me privately that really drove it home. "There are more victims," he said one evening. We were sitting on the back porch again, his usual spot for difficult conversations. I found 2 other families. Not accidents, different situations, but both involved Ethan Calloway getting away with serious crimes because his father made them disappear. He handed me a folder. Inside were case files, police reports, sealed court documents that somehow Jake had obtained. 3 years ago, a college student named Olivia Reed reported Ethan for sexual assault. She had evidence, witnesses, everything. 2 weeks later, she dropped the charges and transferred schools. I tracked her down. Marcus Calloway's lawyers offered her $1 million settlement and threatened to destroy her reputation if she didn't take it. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages. Before that, there was Michael Torres, no relation to Angela. He was a contractor working on one of Marcus's development projects. He reported safety violations that could have gotten people killed. A week later, he lost his contractor's license due to fabricated complaints. His business went bankrupt. He's been rebuilding his life for the past 5 years. How many people has this family destroyed? I asked, my voice hollow. More than we'll ever know. But these 2? They're willing to talk. They want to testify about the pattern of behavior, about how Marcus Calloway uses his money and power to protect his son and silence anyone who threatens their interests. Jake closed the folder. The criminal case against Ethan is just the beginning. Marcus is facing federal charges that could put him in prison for 20 years. And civil suits are being filed by every person he's ever intimidated or paid off. The empire isn't just crumbling. It's being torn apart piece by piece. I looked at my brother-in-law, this quiet, dangerous man who'd somehow orchestrated the downfall of one of the most powerful families in the state. "Emily would be proud of you," I said quietly. Jake's expression softened for just a moment. "I'm doing this for her, and for every other person they hurt." The preliminary hearing was set for a Monday morning in late September. Rachel and I arrived early, flanked by Thomas Brennan and 2 of Jake's security team. The courthouse steps were packed with media crews, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing everywhere. Inside, the courtroom was filled to capacity. I saw the families Jake had found, Olivia Reed, sitting with her parents, looking nervous but determined. Michael Torres, the contractor whose life had been destroyed, sitting alone with his arms crossed. and the witnesses from Emily's accident, Angela, David, and Jennifer, all seated together, supporting each other. Then Ethan walked in with his legal team, and the room went silent. He looked different than before. Thinner, nervous. The smirk was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. His lawyers surrounded him like a fortress, but even they looked strained. Behind them came Marcus Calloway, and for the first time, I saw a man who knew he was losing. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Kevin Hart, a prosecutor with a reputation for taking down corrupt officials. Jake had told me that Hart was one of the few people in the DA's office who couldn't be bought or intimidated. But what I didn't expect was who walked into the courtroom next. Jake. But he wasn't dressed casually like usual. He wore a military dress uniform, decorated with medals, ribbons, insignias that I didn't fully understand, but clearly meant something significant. People in the courtroom noticed. The bailiff straightened. A few veterans in the gallery nodded with respect. Rachel grabbed my arm. "What is he doing?" "I don't know," I whispered back. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Hart outlined the case methodically, the accident, the witnesses, the evidence of Ethan fleeing the scene, the systematic intimidation and bribery that followed. Then he called his first witness, Jake Morrison. Rachel's grip on my arm tightened as Jake took the stand. The bailiff swore him in, and Hart approached. "Please state your name and occupation for the record." "Master Sergeant Jake Morrison, United States Army Special Operations, Delta Force. Currently on extended leave." His voice was calm, authoritative. A murmur went through the courtroom. Delta Force. Even people who didn't know military ranks knew that name. Elite. Dangerous. The best of the best. Ethan's lawyers exchanged worried glances. Marcus Calloway's face went pale. Hart continued, "Master Sergeant Morrison, can you describe your relationship to the victim, Emily Carter?" "She was my niece. My sister's daughter." Jake's voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. "I was overseas when she was killed. When I learned what happened, I came home to support my family." "And what did you discover when you arrived?" "I discovered that the investigation into her death had stalled. Witnesses had disappeared or been silenced. Evidence had been overlooked or dismissed. And the family responsible for her death was using money and influence to avoid consequences." Hart presented documents. "Master Sergeant Morrison, can you explain how you obtained this evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice?" "I used skills acquired during 15 years of military intelligence and special operations work. I conducted surveillance, interviewed witnesses who were too afraid to talk to police, traced financial transactions, and connected networks of corruption that local law enforcement didn't have resources to investigate." Jake looked directly at Marcus Calloway. "I found evidence that Marcus Calloway and his legal team systematically intimidated, bribed, and threatened witnesses. I found evidence of similar patterns in previous cases involving his son. And I connected federal investigators to broader corruption within Calloway Industries." Ethan's lead attorney, a man named Richard Stern, jumped up. "Objection. This witness has no standing to conduct independent investigations. This is vigilante behavior, not legitimate evidence gathering." Judge Harrison, the same judge who dismissed the case before, looked uncomfortable. But Hart was ready. "Your Honor, Master Sergeant Morrison is a decorated military intelligence officer with security clearances that exceed what most civilian law enforcement possess. Every piece of evidence he gathered was obtained legally and has been verified by federal investigators. His testimony establishes the pattern of obstruction that prevented this case from being properly investigated initially." The judge hesitated, then overruled the objection. Hart continued, "Master Sergeant Morrison, you mentioned Delta Force. Can you explain what that is for those unfamiliar?" Delta Force is the Army's premier counterterrorism unit. We conduct high-risk operations requiring specialized skills in intelligence gathering, surveillance, infiltration, and mission execution. Jake's tone was matter-of-fact. "I spent 15 years conducting operations I'm not authorized to discuss in detail." But those operations gave me extensive experience in investigating complex networks, identifying corruption, protecting witnesses, and dismantling organizations that believe they're above the law. The courtroom was dead silent. Every eye was on Jake. And in your professional assessment, what happened in this case? Marcus Calloway ran a systematic operation to obstruct justice. He identified witnesses, deployed legal and financial resources to silence them, and leveraged political connections to prevent prosecution. It was executed with the precision of a military operation. Unfortunately for him, he didn't know he was operating against someone with actual military training. Jake's eyes never left Marcus. In my experience, organizations built on corruption always have vulnerabilities. You just have to know where to look and be willing to expose them, regardless of how powerful they think they are. Hart smiled slightly. No further questions. Stern tried to cross-examine, but there was nothing to attack. Jake had documentation for everything. Federal investigators had verified his findings. His military background gave him credibility that couldn't be challenged. When Jake stepped down, he walked past the Calloways. Ethan wouldn't meet his eyes. Marcus stared at him with pure hatred, realizing that this quiet soldier had systematically destroyed everything he'd built. The hearing continued with witness testimony. Angela described the accident in heartbreaking detail. David explained the intimidation. Jennifer outlined the bribery attempt and subsequent retaliation. Olivia Reed testified about Ethan's previous assault and the cover-up. Michael Torres described how Marcus had destroyed his business for reporting safety violations. By the end of the day, it was clear. Ethan Calloway would stand trial for vehicular manslaughter. Marcus Calloway would face federal charges for obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and a dozen other crimes. The empire had fallen, and my daughter's uncle, a Delta Force operator, had brought it down. The weeks following the preliminary hearing felt surreal. Media coverage was relentless. Jake's revelation that he was Delta Force had turned the case into a national story, not just about a hit and run, but about corruption, power, and justice. But for me, the most powerful moment came when Jake arranged a meeting with the other families he'd found. It was held at Thomas Brennan's law office on a Saturday afternoon. Rachel and I arrived to find people we'd never met, all carrying the same weight of grief and rage that we'd been carrying for months. Olivia Reed was there with her parents, Mark and Susan. Olivia was 26 now, a graduate student trying to rebuild her life after Ethan's assault 3 years ago. She looked fragile but determined, her mother's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Michael Torres came alone. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, wearing work clothes. He'd been a successful contractor before Marcus Calloway destroyed his business. Now he worked odd jobs, barely making ends meet. And then there was a woman I hadn't expected, Lisa Chun. She was in her 40s, sitting in a wheelchair, her hands trembling slightly. Jake approached her immediately, helping adjust her chair. "Everyone, this is Lisa," Jake said gently. 2 years ago, her son Daniel was hit by Ethan Calloway's car while riding his bicycle. Daniel was 14. He survived, but suffered severe brain damage. He's in a care facility now, unable to walk or speak. The room went silent. Rachel's hand found mine, squeezing tight. Lisa's voice was quiet but steady. "Marcus Calloway offered me $2 million to settle and sign an NDA. He said if I didn't take it, his lawyers would prove Daniel ran into the street without looking. He said they'd paint my son as reckless, blame him for his own injuries." Tears ran down her face. "I took the money because I needed it for Daniel's medical care. But I never forgot what they did. And when Jake found me, when he told me I could help stop them from doing this to anyone else, I knew I had to be here." Michael spoke next. "I reported safety violations on one of Calloway's construction sites. Workers were using faulty equipment, no proper safety harnesses, violations everywhere. I documented everything and sent it to the city inspectors. A week later, my contractor's license was suspended based on false complaints. My clients dropped me. My business collapsed. I lost everything because I tried to do the right thing. Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. He assaulted me at a college party. I reported it immediately. I had witnesses, physical evidence, everything. Ethan's lawyers made me out to be a liar looking for attention. They threatened to release private information about me, to destroy my reputation. Marcus Calloway himself called my father and offered $1 million to make it go away. Said if we didn't take it, they'd make sure I never worked in my field again. She wiped her eyes. I took the settlement because I was 23 and terrified, but I've lived with the guilt ever since. Rachel was crying openly now. I felt numb, hearing these stories, realizing how many lives the Calloways had destroyed. Jake stood in the center of the room. This is why I brought you all together. Not just for Emily's case, but because Marcus and Ethan Calloway represent a pattern. They hurt people, then use money and power to silence them. They've been doing it for years because no one had the resources or courage to fight back. He pulled out a folder. The federal case against Marcus is moving forward. Wire fraud, tax evasion, witness tampering, obstruction of justice. He's looking at 20 years minimum. Ethan's criminal trial for Emily's death starts in 6 weeks. The prosecution is rock solid. 3 eyewitnesses, forensic evidence, documentation of the cover-up attempt. Thomas Brennan stepped forward. But we also have civil cases. Each of you has grounds to sue. For wrongful death, for assault, for wrongful termination and defamation, for the injuries to Daniel. The Calloway fortune is substantial, but it's not infinite. Between the federal seizures and civil judgments, we can strip them of everything. Mark Reed, Olivia's father, spoke up. Will it actually work? Or will they find another way to escape? Jake's expression was hard. They can't escape this time. I've made sure of it. Federal prosecutors have seized financial records showing systematic corruption across multiple states. State bar associations are investigating every lawyer who participated in witness tampering. Judges who ruled suspiciously in Calloway's favor are under ethics review. He looked around the room. The system failed all of you because it was corrupted by money. But when you expose corruption at this scale, when federal agencies get involved, when the media is watching, there's nowhere left to hide. Over the next hour, Thomas outlined the legal strategy. Coordinated civil suits. Joint testimony establishing pattern and practice. Media interviews to maintain public pressure. Support networks to help each family through the process. By the end, something had shifted in the room. These weren't separate victims anymore. We were unified. A group of people who'd been broken by the same family, now standing together to ensure justice. As we were leaving, Lisa wheeled herself over to Rachel and me. Your daughter's death is what finally exposed them, she said quietly. Jake told me that if Emily's accident hadn't happened, if he hadn't come home and started investigating, Marcus would still be operating freely. My Daniel, Olivia's assault, Michael's business, all of it would still be buried. She reached for Rachel's hand. Emily's life mattered, and her death is going to save other families from going through what we went through. Rachel collapsed into tears, and Lisa held her hand while she cried. Later that night, I found Jake on our back porch again. You did this, I said. You brought all these people together. You exposed the Calloways. You built a case that the system couldn't ignore. Jake stared out at the darkness. I did what I was trained to do. Identify the enemy. Gather intelligence. Build a coalition. Execute the mission. He turned to me. The Calloways thought they were untouchable. They forgot that there are people in this world who spend their lives taking down people who think they're untouchable. What happens next? Next, we watch them fall. Together. Ethan Calloway's trial began on a cold November morning. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters holding signs with Emily's picture, with Lisa's son Daniel, with photos of all the Calloway victims. News vans lined the streets. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. Rachel and I sat in the front row of the gallery, surrounded by the other families. Jake sat behind us in his military uniform, a quiet, powerful presence. The prosecution team was led by Kevin Hart, with federal prosecutors observing from the back, waiting for their turn with Marcus. When Ethan was let in, he looked nothing like the arrogant kid who'd smirked in the preliminary hearing. He was pale, thin, broken. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. The reality of what he was facing had finally sunk in. Judge Patricia Morrison presided, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for fairness who'd been specially appointed after Judge Harrison recused himself under ethics pressure. She looked at Ethan with cold contempt as the charges were read. Vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death. Obstruction of justice. How does the defendant plead? Ethan's lawyer, Richard Stern, stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Hart methodically built his case, piece by devastating piece. Angela Torres testified first. She described watching Ethan's car blow through the red light, the sickening impact, Emily's body thrown 30 feet. He looked back, she said, tears streaming down her face. I saw him look in his rearview mirror. He saw what he'd done, and he kept driving. David Chun described the accident from his vantage point across the street. Then he described the break-in, the intimidation, the fear that made him recant his original statement. I was a coward, he said quietly. I let them scare me into silence while a family suffered. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Jennifer Martinez testified about the bribery attempt, naming the lawyer who'd approached her. She described losing her job a week later, the systematic destruction of her career for refusing to stay quiet. Then came the forensic experts, accident reconstruction specialists who proved Ethan was traveling at least 70 miles per hour in a 35 zone. Automotive engineers who testified that the brake line story was fabricated. The car showed no signs of mechanical failure. Cell phone records showing Ethan made 3 calls immediately after the accident, all to his father. The defense tried to fight back. They brought expert witnesses who contradicted the prosecution's timeline. They suggested Emily might have stepped into the street unexpectedly. They painted Ethan as a scared kid who panicked and made a terrible mistake. But then Hart called Jake to the stand. Jake walked to the witness box in his dress uniform, medals gleaming. The jury, 10 women and 2 men, diverse in age and background, watched him with visible respect. Hart asked him to explain his investigation. Jake walked through it methodically, showing the jury documents proving witness intimidation, financial payoffs, systematic obstruction. He explained how he'd connected the dots that local law enforcement hadn't been able to pursue. Master Sergeant Morrison, in your professional opinion, what happened the night Emily Carter died? Jake's voice was steady, controlled. Ethan Calloway was driving recklessly while intoxicated. He ran a red light at high speed, struck Emily Carter in a crosswalk, and killed her instantly. He then made a calculated decision to flee the scene and called his father, who immediately deployed legal and financial resources to cover up the crime. This wasn't an accident that was mishandled. It was a killing that was deliberately covered up. Stern tried to cross-examine, suggesting Jake was biased, that his investigation was motivated by personal vendetta. But Jake didn't break. I'm biased toward justice, Jake said calmly. I'm biased against people who use power and money to escape consequences for their crimes. If that's a problem, then yes, I'm biased. The courtroom was silent. The prosecution's final witness was me. I walked to the stand on shaking legs. Hart asked me to talk about Emily, who she was, what she meant to our family, what we lost when she died. I looked at the jury, at 12 strangers who held Ethan's fate in their hands. Emily was 23, I said, my voice breaking. She was smart, kind, hardworking. She wanted to be a teacher. She volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends. She called her mother every day, even when she was busy. She had her whole life ahead of her. I looked at Ethan, who couldn't meet my eyes. And one night, someone killed her and drove away. Left her lying in the street like she didn't matter. Like her life was nothing. Tears were streaming down my face, but I kept going. For months, the system failed us. Police couldn't investigate because witnesses disappeared. Prosecutors couldn't charge anyone because evidence was buried. We were told to accept that justice didn't apply when the rich were involved. I looked back at the jury, but my brother-in-law refused to accept that. He fought for Emily when the system wouldn't. And now we're here, finally, asking you to do what should have been done from the beginning. Hold Ethan Callaway accountable for taking my daughter's life. The defense presented their case, but it was weak. Character witnesses who painted Ethan as a good person who made a mistake. Psychologists who suggested he suffered from panic disorder. But none of it mattered against the mountain of evidence Hart had presented. Closing arguments took a full day. Hart's was devastating, a point-by-point dismantling of every defense claim, a passionate call for justice that left several jurors wiping tears. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. Judge Morrison asked for the verdict. On the charge of vehicular manslaughter, how do you find? Guilty. Rachel collapsed against me, sobbing. Behind us, the other families were crying, holding each other. Jake sat motionless, his face betraying nothing, but I saw his hands unclench. On the charge of leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, how do you find? Guilty. Ethan's head dropped into his hands. His mother, sitting in the back, let out a wail. His father, Marcus Callaway, watching his empire and his son crumble, sat stone-faced, knowing his own trial was coming. Justice had finally arrived. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Morrison's courtroom was packed again. Families, media, supporters, and people who'd followed the case from the beginning. Ethan sat at the defense table, his head down, looking like he'd aged 10 years. Before sentencing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. I went first. I stood at the podium, looking at Ethan, and for the first time since the trial began, he looked back at me. You took my daughter's life, I said, my voice steady despite the pain crushing my chest. You were driving drunk, speeding, reckless, and when you hit her, you made a choice. You chose to drive away. You chose to let her die alone on that street. You chose to let your father cover it up while my wife and I buried our only child. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. For months, you lived your life like nothing happened. You went to parties, posted on social media, smiled for cameras. You didn't care that Emily would never graduate, never get married, never have children. You didn't care because you thought money would protect you. You thought you were untouchable. I paused, but you were wrong. Because Emily had people who loved her. People who wouldn't let her death be forgotten or covered up. And now you'll spend years in prison thinking about what you did. Thinking about the life you took and the life you threw away. Rachel spoke next, her voice breaking with grief. Emily called me every morning before work. Every single morning for 23 years. And now there's silence. You took that from me. You took her laughter, her dreams, her future. You took everything. And I hope every day you spend behind bars, you remember her name. Emily Carter. The girl whose life mattered more than your freedom. Lisa Chun wheeled herself to the podium, speaking about her son Daniel, still in a care facility, still unable to speak or walk because of Ethan's previous hit and run that his father had covered up. Olivia Reed spoke about the assault, the trauma, the years of therapy. Michael Torres spoke about losing his business, his reputation, his livelihood. By the time the statements ended, several jurors from the trial who'd returned to watch were crying. Even the bailiff looked affected. Judge Morrison looked at Ethan with disgust. Mr. Callaway, you've been found guilty of vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident and obstruction of justice. These crimes were compounded by your family's systematic attempt to pervert justice through witness intimidation and bribery. You showed no remorse, no accountability, no recognition of the harm you caused until you were caught and exposed. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. This court sentences you to 25 years in state prison for vehicular manslaughter, 5 years for leaving the scene, and 10 years for obstruction of justice, to be served consecutively. That is a total of 40 years. with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. Ethan collapsed. His mother screamed. His father sat frozen, knowing his own sentencing was coming. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed us. Rachel and I stood with Jake, the other families beside us, and made a brief statement. Justice took too long, but it finally came, I said into the microphones. Emily's death exposed corruption that had been hidden for years. It brought together families who'd been silenced and gave them a voice. We hope this sends a message that no amount of money or power puts anyone above the law. That victims matter. That truth matters. Jake stood beside me, silent but present, the soldier who'd gone to war for his niece and won. 3 months later, Marcus Calloway's federal trial concluded. He was convicted on 18 counts: wire fraud, tax evasion, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $127 million in restitution and fines. Callaway Industries collapsed. Assets were seized, sold off, distributed to victims through civil settlements. The foundation that bore the family name was dissolved. The empire Marcus had built through corruption was dismantled completely. But the most important moment came 6 months after Ethan's sentencing. Rachel and I, along with Jake and the other families, stood outside a small community center. Above the door was a new sign, the Emily Carter Justice Foundation. "We can't bring Emily back," I said to the small crowd gathered for the opening. "But we can make sure her death means something. This foundation will help families fight against wealthy defendants who try to buy their way out of justice. We'll provide legal support, investigative resources, and witness protection. We'll be the voice for people who've been silenced." Jake had helped set it all up, connecting us with pro bono lawyers, investigators from his military network, victim advocates. The foundation would be his legacy gift to Emily, even as he prepared to return to active duty. That night, Rachel and I visited Emily's grave. The stone was simple, beautiful, with her dates and a line that said, "Beloved daughter." Her light still shines. "She'd be proud of what we did," Rachel whispered, placing flowers on the grave. "She'd be proud of Jake," I said. "He didn't just get justice for her. He exposed an entire system of corruption. He saved other families from going through what we went through." Rachel leaned against me, and we stood there in the quiet, feeling something we hadn't felt in almost a year: peace. Emily was gone. That pain would never fully heal. But her death had sparked something powerful. It had brought down a corrupt empire, exposed systemic injustice, and created a foundation that would help others. Her life mattered. Her death mattered. And the justice that finally came would echo for years. As we walked back to our car, I thought about Jake, the quiet soldier who'd come home and waged war against impossible odds. The Delta Force operator who'd used every skill he possessed to honor his niece's memory. Emily couldn't be saved. But because of her uncle, because of the truth he exposed, countless others would be. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. Before we say goodbye, I need to ask you something important. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I'd love to know where Emily's story reached you. And here's something else I'm curious about. What kind of stories do you want to hear next? Betrayal? Military revenge? Family conflicts? Cheating stories? Let me know in the comments what type of content you'd like me to bring you, and I'll make sure to deliver exactly what you're looking for. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or made you believe in justice again, please hit that like button and subscribe for more epic revenge and thriller stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Until next time, take care of yourself and your loved ones. I'll see you in the next story.